This is a production of Cornell University.
First, please allow me to acknowledge and thank our donors, Barbara and David Zalaznick, who through their generosity have so enriched our lives here at Goldwin Smith Hall. Mary Ann Marsh, Sarah Rice, and my colleagues in creative writing, whose hard work and vision have made this series and the program here at Cornell such a success. Thank you, Dawn, whose poems I have admired since we first met, so I guess that's 17 years ago now.
Don't say that out loud.
Oh my God. For making time in your schedule to come to Ithaca. And finally, thank you all for saying to yourselves, who cares about that -6-degree wind chill? Poetry is warmth enough. Poetry is worth it. It is. When I think of Dawn Lundy Martin's work, I think of breath, of the mouth, of the container of the body, of the struggle for words to exit and free themselves from the body and the betrayals it engenders. Dawn's readings are wrenching. Hitched each to each, her words lurch and break, yank and pitch across each breath. Listeners find themselves drawn forward in their seats. Her poems have torque. What thing is made without waste or threat? Her work asks. And for access to the body politic, must one relinquish a right to establish boundaries with regards to the body personal? How easily the ways in which we use language to link ourselves to our fellow man break down. How quickly our philosophizing about those linkages disintegrates. How then walk, as Sonia Sanchez in Does Your House Have Lions puts it, toward dare say? How map, as Dawn herself writes in a critical essay, a trajectory toward saying, toward resolution, where the emergent subject will find its language, hybrid or other, and make a way in speech. Here is creative arts practice as critical inquiry, vital lifeblood to work both within and beyond the university. Dawn Lundy Martin's poems don't just encourage rereading, they insist upon it. And they reward the reader with intellectual dilemmas, the figuring of which is the work of being a citizen today. That making a way out of no way, my great-grandmama warned me, was a central task. How to inhabit the sensation of living. Dawn's is a strikingly original and forceful voice on the contemporary literary scene, and her excellent work continues to gain national notice. Her debut collection, A Gathering of Matter, A Matter of Gathering, won the 2006 Cave Canem Poetry Prize. Her next, Discipline, was a finalist for both the Lambda Literary Award and the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. Life in a Box is a Pretty Life is her latest collection, in which we're seized and thrown, as Fred Moten writes, into the festival of detonation we hope we've been waiting for. In that collection, she writes, historically, we extend, we drift into, we are back straight, we bind, we draw, we categorize. We are punitive with regard to fairness only. We are method, we are order. What would you do without us? Oh, we are so very smitten. I am, as ever, so very smitten and very pleased to welcome Dawn Lundy Martin.
I was so captivated by that introduction, I almost forgot that I was reading. It's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. I am, I've just been so interested in all the conversations I've been having since I've gotten here about this work and about your work. So thank you. And I have to say, I've been thinking about this visit for a long time. I like a program that invites you like 15 months before you're supposed to read, because then it's like kind of like this anticipation. You're always in this space of desire, which I like. So I'm going to start with, I think I'll start by reading a few poems from Discipline. I'm going to set my timer. The reason that I'm going to do this is partly because I actually think about these two collections as related, even though they're very different books for me. They kind of inhabit the same space of questioning. So I mentioned earlier in one of the classes that I visited, I mentioned that the way that I think about discipline is this, it asks a certain set of philosophical questions around the possibility for making a choice. Like, what does it mean to make a choice? How does that differ from compulsion? How does that differ from discipline? And discipline, for me, in the Foucauldian sense, that kind of discipline is the exact opposite of making a choice, right? So at the same time, there's a narrative thread through the book which has to do with my father, who at the time was dying from a cancer of the blood. And so there is this kind of like dark sensibility in the work as well. And he and I have had a complicated relationship, although it was one of love at the same time. And when he was dying, I kept a journal, and I'm not a journal keeper. And I didn't keep it toward any end. Like I just kept it as a way of kind of like dealing with the day, really, right? So I don't think there's anything else to say about these pieces before I read them, except that they are mostly prose poems. So they're not lineated. They're mostly prose poems, with the exception of one or two pieces, including this first one, which is called Excreta. The rest are untitled, so when I get to the rest, you will not hear any titles. Excreta, or sentence, or ripe. Here the held grip over, and flood liquid a defecated magic. Everything said was surprising, cosmologica in seconds, in breath attempts under weight metal. Here the jar, here the inside of the jar. Excruciation fixed, or phrase, or doubt. They went in, 3 went in, and 3 emerged, although significantly reduced. Disposition fragrance like mules or dung. When one is told the structure or the method and the staggering absence of or the omnipresent existence of, it becomes difficult to get on the subway or bathe one's own body. These are acts of resistance, so they appear to be acts. These are acts of forgetting, though they appear to be acts of resistance or love. So, okay, I'm going to take a break to tell you a little personal thing, which is that's a poem that's kind of set separate from the rest. So I realized recently that I'm going age blind, like when you turn 40 and all of a sudden you can't see shit. That's what's happening to me. And so I got these glasses at the drugstore. I can't see you, so I'm not going to look up, but I can see down. Let me try that. So here's where the prose poems begin. Not so much a name, but the result of a name as a metaphor for the eyes inward turning. It might say what the thing is, or it might not know. So then, heritage is fantasy, that the seer looks toward a past, markers of it in food and location, in wrecked bodies, flesh, strung, etc. A want toward warmth, highways of sun through windows where it might not reach. So when I imagine the father as a boy, he said, "In fields a child." And here the hand holds an infant, his, and jumps from a very tall building or threatens to jump in the name of something believed. Bodies in uncommon strobes, what mystery and jaunty bodies, or are they murderous bodies? Who can tell? I can't tell. Streaming video, private locations, large hard hands inserted in zippers. There's unrecognizable scent. There were, are, a we there, a timeless we, a we of all on a wall, we that drift in and out of doors and into musty bathrooms that feel wet all the time. How many ordinances exist? Local communities flailing, screaming into night as fish would into night. What kind of brilliant stare in their scrubbed features, their lips smacking on cream cheeses. I want to laugh, but repulsion invades the body and makes it want to pee. Every silent wailing could find its place in these acts, where the other meets the self. Meat flesh, just order the fucking latte. I am a living example, bootstrap fool hanger on, is there a thing to recover? National dialogues on the blotting screen, everywhere's down from here, they say, unless. A voice is bare, inaudible. It mouths, "My father is half his normal weight and in a bed in Hartford Hospital." Hollows or glass, fragments of being, being or nothing, near not being. Precisely what the body resists, the body is. They turn the television on for comfort. They tuck the sheets and pull them into neat corners, its edges of order. We had a house full of books. Mothers warn against usual dangers, men in the sun. Rough hands of the friends shield against strangers. It becomes difficult to imagine a harmful stranger. You are supposed to write an essay titled "Dirty Love," but you can't, because you are exhausted by him, the friend, his attic apartment, his slack bathrobe, his rum and cokes and Kent cigarettes. Your skin was lighter when you were 11 and you were more desirable. Fluorescent supermarket lights make the whole thing worse. Reflections, comeuppance. Before the effort and desire, one hurries into the porn store and then hurries out again. She's the only one hurrying. Everyone else is motionless, recoverying. One remembers being someone's girl, the possession of someone else. That kind of safety. For what, then? Flap of pages turning. Here is the size of a hole. Here is the size of what happened before and of no one watching. Every day it happens or doesn't happen. The eye struggles to become a part of the reeking body. The body drifts off to fuck like a ghost. In countries with barriers, an attack unwarranted, wrists held tight behind the back, great views from the wooden window toward whatever. Iowa, strict Jesus, a cock stinking belligerently. In December, lights blanket snowing streets, a dark girl under cover of white. There is no world outside of this. Walls of white and white bliss, flakes sting skin, undeniable and wanted. We could find incidents toward exigencies, moments that should urge, compel. Which accumulated evidences would suffice? There are bodies stuffed in trees, we know that. We see them when we do not anticipate them, hungry and echoing into chilled air. We pass cities in the middles of nowheres. We know them by their smokestacks, wires, and infernos burning atop holes in the sky. White families post private and no trespassing signs in their front yards. I want to yell out the window, I am both very alive and very dead. I am a suspect. Why has no one named me as a suspect? There is a disappearance so incrementally slow, no one notices. A left hand touching the right hand, a touching and being touched, a consideration of which. So tell me, it sings, how can I live forever? When a man is trapped, his words are trapped in the defect of the body. When hundreds of untold stories make the body convex, ape out, indulge in excess so that the mouth is never empty. When the grass of youth is so far away, a tale of a tale of a tale, when thinning out drags the skin, when a life so small it is disremembered, scant and numbered, framed by ritual, the steps to the cellar refrigerator, the heaves of breath, and the particular and unordinary love for a daughter more than a reach away, when derelict is as wasting away, when sleeves of abandoned mask the face, when one speaks into drapes and wind, whispers against drift, unheard, when almost everything, every small and huge thing is in one room, one insubstantial place covered by a roof that leaks through a gun hole when thunderous rain, when it is this life, and there is the infrequent kiss of the absent daughter, and there is the singular desire of not forever, maybe, but just one more, minute after minute, when there simply is. So I will stop there with discipline. I should say too, I want to say, although I never say this, but I'll say it here, that there's another haunting narrative that is a kind of unspeakable narrative in this text that is separate from the father narrative and separate, connected really to the kind of confusion between the difficulty in making a choice or a compulsion and discipline. And I think that that kind of fuels that question, right? The unspoken narrative, the thing that wants to be said but cannot be said, that I will not say, right? So that's also there. Life in a box is a pretty life. It actually isn't. I mean, maybe it is. I don't know if you like enclosures. That the consideration extends itself, like what happens here is, for me, less optimistic. Though what is optimism, Is this the right time? Is it really 4:54? Oh, it is. Okay. So there's, so it's less optimistic. Although there are moments of bright optimism, kind of like a bird singing. Birds are always in poems, right? Would you even have poetry if it weren't for birds? A high, clear note sometimes, in these poems, just like, something you need in order to be able to live, really. How does one live? How do we all just stay alive, given everything? Anyway. So this is, so I like to start, both of these books, one of the commonalities is that I feel like they should be read from beginning to end. And, people will enter when they enter, but, I like reading them, starting at the beginning when I read. So I will read this collection to you from the beginning, and I'll say that there are, so again, most of the pieces are untitled. In this case, there are like section titles. They're not really even titles, I'm saying that, but they're more like kind of linguistic markers of a shift. Except for the very first poem, which I talked about with the class earlier, which does actually have a title. And it comes from my experience with some other poets being in residence at, I was in residence with Yona Harvey is one of the poets, two other poets whose names I embarrassingly can't remember. And it was 2 years ago. And we got to spend, 4 or 5 days with just alone in the museum the Montclair Museum of Art with the collection, and they asked us for their centennial celebration to, write something in relation to our experience with the art. And so I wrote this piece, which is mostly prose, but not only. And it's called Modern Frame, or a Philosophical Treatise on What Remains Between History and the Living, Breathing Black Human Female, after Carrie Mae Weems's Framed by Modernism, 1996. To feel a presence, they say, can be like a haunting. You are yourself and no other physical being is there, yet a feeling or sensation emerges as if from nowhere, like the negress. The Black female body not in repose, instead walking or clickety-clack. It knocks at the door, which is the surface of existence. Or in life, it walks down the street and is asked to assume a position of slackness in response to the perception of being in perpetual heat. What would we do without her? How would we know ourselves? Indeed, we need something against which the pristine can manifest itself, can create its artifice of pristineness. To be unadorned or unclothed, light bursts. Glare from fluorescent mouths breathe their prophet into me. No one hears the glass sound of breath, just me. Was, quote, low, they say, quote, fastened in place by violence, was, quote, ritualized, was, quote, debased and, quote, grotesque, was, quote, black flesh, or, quote, swathed in, quote, blackness and, quote, finality and, quote, nature, was, quote, sensualized. In standing repose, the object lures us into a belief that she is indeed human. We know this from her sun-draped eyes, her capacity for deceit. We see no absolute proof, however, against the artist's outstretched offering, the Mammy Trophy and the, quote, fantastic Al Jolson performing his signature tune. Enter machines and abstractions, automations to lengthen legs, round edges, plump buttocks, relational fish, irrational fissure. All this shimmery ache in one place, suddenly against your back. My body aflame with it, can't you see? Make an outline around my form. Use your chisel. I will indulge your every little fit, your perfect muse, your blank, blank, your everything, also your nothing. Insofar as the phrase, quote, black woman, replace outside of domestic, quote, power. I lie down in the ditch myself, stretch my body alongside the dead myself. Outside the frame, oblique lover, de Kooning maybe, as a young beauty. His hand reaches in to retrieve me and pets me, my nakedness a fine scratch. Filament traces in the historical body. Representation falls away. Chokehold, quote, blackness, swallowed, quote, brown, your, quote, black father, whose, quote, blackness precedes him, stumble and laborious, quote, black gait toward, quote, absence, cross your, quote, black, empty hands against your empty, cross your, quote, black hands, empty your, quote, black pockets, hold your, quote, poor, quote, black baby against a, quote, brick, quote, wall as instructed, and the, quote, niggers get, quote, sold up the, quote, river against a, quote, lithe, quote, white fluff. You wail a mimic mouth into beaded rhythms of usness, fragrance of a cosmos where roads are not partitioned, no roads, no marks to mark up the whole big, wide world. The holes of the universes untethered from time. In absence of wholeness, catch glimpses of the sides of selves. If we could be without him, we would. Is there any country without him? We are told of the reservoirs that they are without sea or wind, that we attach laconic swerve and hold what has happened there. Trauma sack. What strikes me, she says, is how easy it is to commit atrocities. Remove from experience rain, unnurture the physical form. A girl is just a girl. One ass cheek on a full chair, balancing. Remove skin, water, sunlight, love. Position the neck so that the landscape dissolves into black wall. Excise language puffs from pharynx. Unfurl the scroll. Hear ye, hear ye. We are blank with glee. When dissonance occurs, go to the back of the line. When it ratchets itself up, jump into the river. Mammoth voice is our voice, the other side of illness. We're always here. The mother with a jar of hair grease, her provocations to keep you well. In the woods, you'll hear a fire, but there is no fire. Hold on to the photo of the girl in a pale green dress. Require less sustenance. Crush your strings into a single acre. There is one thing that I neglected to say, but should, in that, so in this book, there's a we. There's more than one we, but there's this particular we that is a kind of like the kind of a voice of authority, or a kind of official voice, as if, all of the voices of authority and kind of repression have come together in one voice, I guess. So that happens. I don't know if it's going to happen in the section that I'll read you, because I haven't actually decided. So I'm going to read a little bit more and see what happens. Although that was it just now. Oh, Susanna, how the sun sets on this lovely land. Dee-da-dee-da-da-dee-dee. Place where cavernous, dee-dee-dee-dee-da. In the square, we drink iced coffees, bam, bam, pow, pow. One more cerveza, otro, everything. Ship workers in from wherever. Let them maintain our harmony, our fortitude. Fold happy hands in grace. It feels so good to be here. A thriving sea, even though it's sick, and everyone's kind of sick too, huffing landscapes of junked cars and computer keyboards. I'm wary. My mother is not the person I used to know, and one night I cry into stitched silence, and again later when it's hot under blankets, turn to face water, or I am water, dream of drowning returned. Irina says poems always have birds in them, or dreams always have drowns in them. The dog is so strong in this one I cannot protect him. Say again we could not know the limp of decades, and the body waves a giant flag in wind, your face becoming my face. Goodbye again. It's colonial logic, really. There are things here we desire, resources, drip into lapis and full like light is full, all my media meaningless in this light, a strange farce, the weapons, unexpected. Seer says, of, but not from. In here, it always smells of burning wood and rain. My status is ruptured. Sensation of a black boy walking. When you wake, your ass is bare, your door is open. When you shit yourself, parades. How to register the junket in the current condition. Think of the tiny placid form. Hey girl, hey, hey. Come to me wholeness and fresh. A narrow vial of wilderness. Then factor of dissembling. What it does in split. I speak to you from a crack in the surface, from the elongated scar, a silver cylinder. Fortress upon me, the eye in dramatic gesticulation, its facade trembling. When the soldiers come, and they will come, it will be important to note known objects of particular use. Fatback, your yard loins, rivers, my father's black uniform. When later the fold is undone, no memory. Form arrives at the end of language. The body in the basement is bobbled with welts. It cries and cries in a wet corner. We must leave this in the well. Representation just fell away to liberate the past from the past. Whispers, my father's cold lantern, brown and gray Dickies. Memory, the absence of thought. Pull all hair from comb, fold into square of white paper, set fire over toilet. When we were kids every day, nothing. Knees tugged together. When no light, pale purple dress pulled down to hem, knees to cover, someone distance, mouth pinch, hum, silent hum, not a song, but a series of sounds or grunts, black flies in the backs of throats. In this photo, the yard is safe. The other one is demonstrative in its affections. You inhale wet air, feel lonely as blue shoes are lonely, grime there, to reach into the open mouth and pull out a foreign substance, a bone or a lock. I know nothing about the yard, I say when questioned, bare souls undoing themselves. Some try to tell us that reading is the same as living, but we know this is not the case. The letter is not a breath. Even the body's cells are contrivance or accidents, floating screens, black bodies, unfathomable, violent acts. Only Will Smith has been spared. There is writing, and then there is this cut, this whelm. When I, a lad, swelling and succumbed, no one spoke to me, dripping. They tell me I should lurk, shoulders cast forward, bullish, shutters pelt into braced maw. She sent me a mauve dream, and I thought the words cracked open. All the wolves, what we might produce in shadows for fawns. Hello, free house, hello. No goodbye. So long, buzzards, wide-eyed ghosts. So this penultimate section, I'll just read a few pieces. The linguistic marker before this section is this. Without knowing the slightest thing about war, I find myself an instrument of labor, investigation, and experiment. What are the dimensions of the field? They've put me here in the tallest grasses and strangest fruit and have demanded at gunpoint that I bend into it over and over. But I am so tired and my limbs are sore and I feel disconnected, or I disintegrate. A shadow figure towers over me as I exhaust, body buckle, ballast removed. When the dirt is black enough, when my hand is strong enough, I dig into it, open space and fall through other side to a black sound, a black stone, familiar thieves, Urdu, or the last language we spoke before mother's milk. They circle around me, clasping wrists, and I yell into a hole in the earth, and earth, my palm proffers Ormo, undoing silt, break away. This is the body bending over my body. They have encircled me with their manacled tongues, but I do not understand them. My form is small and lean, but they think I am large and bull-eyed. What is yielded here is nothing. No sign of blood, no sign of dripping, no ache, only my small form without space around it. What is the body but a leaking form? No room for leaking. A form so tight around my form it cannot seep or gesture. Complete enclosure. To hold a drop of water is extreme labor, tongue against ground. The difference between experience and dreams falls away. There are locks in every corner like little eyes. Even time no longer passes, each fractured second redundant artifice of time, of location, my father's red eyes. If there is a wandering, I do not know it. The eye lock has its determinate grip. When I open my mouth, someone else speaks words that happen in my dreams as islands. Jaw agape, the work of wheezing each day to the river but dry, weight of crackling. In the hand, a mass of grandfather's thin hair, wind mass. A voice speaks soft into ear, says irretrievable, says the dog too cries, mama. Hair, a spare mass of grief. How to make the self distinct amongst whales, amongst white whales. A dead fawn under the machinery. I am the machinery, am also the end of the sentence. In heat they want me, also to lap at their crotches, saying thank you because their syntax wants definition of this body. All the colors, it is you who are they. From inner valve, an Orphic effort, a monument force against your greed feast, your half-lidded gulps. You ruminate, you vomit into the mouths of fawns. You say, I love you. I love you. My form, removed from its home, its warmth, its sustenance. They tell me I have enough, that I'm not dying. But I can see my own gray legs ashen. To witness the floor, and then it's me on the floor. Carry the draped body, feet first, already a hole forked, my spirit confused from return. The slaves blink their slow eyes. They pull their tie knots close to collars, dead wings, faces bald, and speak with ease. Boom, the voices go, my head an empty vase. They will tell you that I was sick, that I was a drug addict. They will tell you I died a natural death. Sometimes when people just die, they will say, we don't know why. They will say I was lazy, that I could not work because of disease or just general feebleness. When a crime is committed by a white man, they will show you a picture of me instead and call me a trickster. In the photo, my jaw is slack, my hair wild. They will say that I am unkillable, that my body resists battery by tree trunks, bullets, and small years and small cells. When I enter a store to buy something, I will be immediately arrested, and then they will apologize. I am just a child, I will say. Impossible to be so greasy and a child, they will say. There are no children anymore. Why are you so sad? They will ask me. Why is your heart so weak? We've given you everything, they say. Why won't you flourish? The slaves are dressed as men. They go to work in gray suits. Their bodies are grammar incarnate, so they bracket force when inside gated halls. They contain themselves in bright photographs that refuse speech. They partition the doors to prevent interlopers. Sometimes they use the word savage when the containers leak. Thank you.
So Dawn has agreed to take some questions.
So you said not just 2 hours ago when you were in our classroom, you said something that really spoke to me, and I think to a lot of the kids in our class. You said, how do we know ourselves but through language?
Mm-hmm.
And what I've noticed a lot about how you write is, especially on, I believe it's page 80, you you not only create, I mean, in your book, I don't know the title of it because there aren't titles, but you invent a few words in that particular poem, and you show us that you can invent language too, which gives hope for almost a self-invention. And I think that's reinforced by just another line from one of your poems I happen to have in here. You say, "When the seer said you might be a completely new person in a year." And I think this sense of invention does give rise to a hope in the right now too, because you have hope for the coming times. And so I was wondering if you would read that poem, because I would love to hear your language and the way that you use the spaces.
On page 80. I want to say something in kind of preface to that too, which is like, one of my favorite poet theorists, her name is Erica Hunt, and she's been like a kind of, she was certainly when I was younger, a kind of like anchor for my thinking and my poetics. And, one of the things that she said is that like ordinary language creates ordinary thought, which that's a summary. But, so to get outside of that, I stopped before page 80. I see what you're saying. So I'll read this. I stopped because one of my other favorite people, Myung-Mi Kim says, there's some moments that are untranslatable orally. I will try. Repository. Chemical doorways, many armies. Fragrance glut, plume, vine torn. Where are my hands and my feet? Where are the lights? In here, I'm right before your eyes. Fa. Blue, red, twinkle. That's my best rendition.
Thank you. My question is, who's your most important reader for either of your books or just generally?
It's hard. That's a really hard question. Who's my most important reader? I don't know. There's I think that, you mean in process or after the fact of the publication? Wherever. Yeah. I don't know. I think that I'm a fan of Nathaniel Mackey's idea, not necessarily that he invented this idea, but that the work creates a kind of audience. I never have an imagined audience necessarily, although with this book, with Life in a Box is a Pretty Life, I've said, reading this, I've only read it a few times so far, but that I wrote this book for Black people because all my audiences are always like really white, and I'm like, I'm gonna write a book for Black people. I'm gonna invent a Black audience for my work. Whatever, I'm trying. But that's kind of a jokey answer. But I do think that there's a way in which a kind of work kind of creates an audience. I never think about audience when I'm writing. I think I said this earlier, and I think about a kind of investment in the moment of writing, and the act of creating something is the most important thing for me. So I think the moment that I start to think about audience is the moment that I start to get outside the poem, in a way, right? I'm interested in the process of making and kind of entering that space where part of your brain, a little piece of it lifts up, as opposed to thinking about who's out there, who are the receivers of the thing. But I do hope that when the work kind of intersects with readers, that that's the way that the audience is created. That's a very evasive answer, but that's what I got.
So you talked a bit about how the we was an authoritative voice, and I was wondering if you could talk about the they.
The they.
Yeah, the they will tell you that kind of.
Yeah, I think that's less. They're kind of the same, right? But from a different perspective. Except, I think that the we as an authoritative voice is a kind of it's as if you could kind of take discourse, kind of all the interweavings of discourse and make it into an entity, like a monster, right? And so like that's like the we that speaks when it's like, oh, you know, it's like I was saying all these things. And so, but the they, I think, you know, is, you know, that they can actually be actual. This is what they say. It could be the media, you know, because like this is what they say. They tell us these things. They collude to tell us these things. It may be like a bracketing. It's just from a different perspective. I think less kind of, you know, science fiction-y, less dystopic, maybe not, I don't know. But, you know, less kind of like embodied in this kind of, you know, imagined kind of mass that's created in this moment of the we. I really wanted to have this kind of, this really like as if authority could be a being. So this is, I guess, you know, there's a different gesture behind them. So that's a gesture behind that. And then, although they might be like the same beings or set of beings or collusion or collision of beings, like the they from this other perspective is like, you know, kind of like, I think the they, in my imagination, or the way that I think about it, is kind of like less that kind of like figure writ large or whatever, but a kind of pointing to what they do when they do it, right? And it could, you could kind of like name it, but you can't really name, I think, the we is clearly. In different situations, you can say, yeah, that's right, that's what they do, you know? They're like, oh, yeah, who committed the crime, you know? They'll say these people committed the crime when they don't actually know, right? You can name that they. So I think I think there's a subtle difference, and it's a difference not only of perspective, but of kind of, you know, my intention around it that may not actually be legible on the page.
Always great to hear you read. I actually have a related question about pronouns, and this is from Discipline. I was really taken in that collection the way you trouble the lyric I, and a refrain I found is it's often preceded by the article the I, in a way that would make me pause and question what this thing I stands for. So I wonder if you could say maybe something about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I talked about this a little earlier, and in the class that I visited, but you know, I'll say that like, so there are a lot of different things at work there, and one of the things that's at work is that some of my other work kind of comes out of my earlier work is, you know, really about a relationship to trauma. And so like, you know, having this kind of, you know, experience of trauma makes me kind of like really intimately connected to this possibility of like the multiple selves. And it makes me really just trust kind of the singular, stable, you know, a singular, stable subjectivity, but of course, you know, that is related to like the lyric I. And the example that I gave earlier has to do with like the, you know, about, you know, physical torture as a kind of like perfect example of like when the I becomes separate from the other I, the body, right? And so, you know, if you read torture narratives, there's a way in which, there's often this kind of like way in which, you know, there's a part of the self that will separate from the self to look down on the body or at the body, because that's like a means of surviving. And I think that and I want to bring that into often this kind of like thinking about what it means to be like a racialized subject, right? You know, like how do you survive? Like what are the ways in which we are not singular, but multiple as a means of survival, right? And so like, I think that comes into this work in you know, a very direct way. Like I'm really suspect of, you know, this Western notion of like the singular self, because, you know, experience like dictates otherwise for many of us for different reasons, you know.
Could you talk a bit about your writing process and maybe some writing practices that you would recommend most highly to aspiring poets?
Yeah, I recommend complete isolation. Like, you know, like just go somewhere. Turn off the television, turn off the internet, you know, and get some friends who want to do the same thing. I don't know, you know, so like my writing process is, I mostly write in the summer because I'm teaching and doing other things during the school year. And so I spend like 4 months in the summer doing actually just that, to kind of have like a ritual of writing, you know, just like make it like a forced habit, because for me, I don't always sit down when writing poems, for example, and say, I'm going to write a poem about X. It's the practice that produces the content sometimes. Sometimes it's the form that produces the content, right? So to do it like regularly in a like really sustained way, to like set times when I'm like, okay, for these 4 hours with my 4 friends who are doing the same thing, because I actually like this complete isolation with others is what I like. As opposed to like, just being alone and kind of like a lonely, writer in a cabin. I like a lonely writer in a cabin with other lonely writers in the cabin. But I do think that there's something that happens in a kind of sustained practice that does create that kind of thing I was talking about earlier, which is like when you open up that part of your brain. And I think this is true for any artistic practice. I can never remember names, but there's that choreographer who has that wonderful book about ritual and about practice and about entering the room, entering like it's the same thing, entering like, you have to create this piece, you enter just a white room, right? Like, how do you get at, what are you gonna do in that white room? Like, how do you know? And I think it's like this practice. And, I also wanna say that, my practice varies depending on like what I need or what I want. And I like to listen to strange things. I like to have sound effect, a rhythm. And I think that the way that you do that is to like have sound playing, some kind of sustained kind of sound for a long period of time. I think, who would I I would put like, oddly, somebody like Amiri Baraka and Robert Creeley in the same kind of realm of, here is, I'm not saying I'm writing bebop, but there it is, that there it is because that's what I'm listening to, that's what I'm kind of interested in kind of a sonic level. I think all kinds of sounds can like affect an artwork.
One of the really unique and amazing things about life in a box is a pretty light is, like you said earlier, it's best read from start to finish, and there's a certain order to the poem, or to the book, where it kind of circles on itself. And I was wondering kind of about the way the poems are ordered in the book, if that's something that you figured out after you wrote individual pieces, or did you have that in mind as you were writing it, and what your thought process about that was?
It was really something that came later. In fact, the construction of the book at the last, there was like, I had written this work, and I was just like, okay, now where's the book? Like, I had no idea where the book was. So it came later. And, it's kind of like, in some ways I think you have to think about, or I have to think about the book as a kind of poem. And it's, it's a kind of poem, I think about the stanza as a kind of poem if I'm writing like more stanzaic, lineated poems, kind of mini poem, inside this like larger thing. And so I had to think about the relation once all of this stuff was written. I like that you mentioned the repetition because like it's always, I think, in work that's not like, especially, well, I can't say that about all work, but like, I think about my work in this way because it's not like immediately kind of, it's not like immediately accessible. It's kind of like, it has a kind of resonant or like a resonating accessibility. That repetition really becomes important to that kind of like understanding, as you work through the book, as you read through it, to kind of like have these markers, sometimes even the same language. There's actually a moment here that there's a line from my very first book, which I thought was cute, but nobody reads across to the first book, but, so there's, it's actually what is simple as nothing. That's the line that's from the first book. But yeah, I think that they become kind of like a different kind of anchor. There are other grounds on which to stand, I think, in the book, but those are different kinds of anchors, just that kind of like, that the repetition in both like idea and sometimes language, or sometimes like variations in language.
I was interested in what you were saying about optimism and the sort of strategies we have in our writing around aspiration and living and that kind of stuff. And so I was wondering if there's any situations in which there could be a reason to suspend that optimism insofar as, you know, a work that's more interested in trauma or the tragical melancholy or something like that, would there be, because, I mean, this is a very tendentious question for my own work, but what
do you mean
is
by
the most
optimism? When you say optimism, what are you referring to?
Like resolution, maybe, or something like that, like having, yeah, a desire to resolve through something that's diametrically opposed to the tragic, whether it's just conceptual or, you know, otherwise.
I think that that one has to, in a sense, become optimistic in the space of like irresolution or unresolution. You know, I don't think that, I think that resolution in a sense is either, you know, accident or, you know, the Hollywood movie or something, you know, like where does resolution occur? I don't know. I think that I would love to know more about your project, and I think if I did, I could answer this question to your liking more, because I'll just talk, you know. But I think that, you know, what's optimistic in this book, you know, like I was saying before, that there really are, there's like these moments of, you can stand outside yourself, right? There's no way out, I think, you know, like we live in a dystopic time. We live in the prediction that is, you know, kind of like always, you know, kind of dire. So like, you know, you know, how do you do that? Like, how do you survive that, right? Like, where do you go? I think the creative in itself is one possibility, to like make something that speaks in concert with all of these other ways of speaking. I mentioned earlier, I was talking about, you know, the way that, for me, you know, the way that I think about discourse, you know, kind of like, you know, this kind of like intertwining of, you know, kind of like myriad, like innumerable utterances that inhabit the world and make the world, right? So on one hand, there's like Fox News and what they're, you know, like their constant like blah, blah, blah. What's on the other side of that? How else can like that is optimistic for me in the sense that like, you know, these kinds of utterances or different utterances that are not necessarily already known utterances, or say, you know, kind of like fictional and repressive utterances, contribute to the making of the world, right? So that's, I think, you know, one possibility or two possibilities for like, you know, way of kind of thinking about what's optimistic. Right, yeah, I think that, you know, one has to recognize that, you know, and this, in some ways, it may not just be our times, you know, like all times, like medieval times were just like as brutal, you know, like what wasn't brutal in, you know, like medieval Europe, it was brutal, you know, we always live in brutal times in a sense, I guess, but like, you know, so what do you do inside that? And I think that, you know, those are, you know, two ways of thinking about optimism. You know, I also think just about like, you know, within the realm of trauma, there's a way in which psycho, like, you know, theory, kind of like psychoanalysis in particular, is all about remembering, you know. You have to remember the trauma, you have to like work through it, you have to like, you know, also like disparage your mother. But one could also forget as a possibility. Is not forgetting a possibility for like recovery? Are there other ways of kind of like existing in like at least, at the very least, imagine spaces of freedom?
Let's thank Dawn again.
Thank you.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.